Hello everybody! Today we'll be looking at the open-sourced Pico Voltex. This was sent to me by the creator, Speedy Potato, but I'm not paid for this review. Anyway, the Pico Voltex is a mini controller for the Japanese arcade game Sound Voltex. Mini because it's tiny. Instead of using bigger micro switches or giant arcade buttons, the Pico Voltex uses keyboard switches on it. And it's also hot swap too if you're into that. The encoders for the knobs and the knobs themselves are small too. All in all, this controller is just tiny. It's available for purchase on speedylabs.shop for about $100 without the enclosure and $114 for with the enclosure. If you're wondering what the enclosure is, it's what the creator calls the 3D printed case for the controller. To be honest, the case is actually really nicely printed, like really nice fine print. It almost looks like it's glittering from the back. But yeah, anyway, the controller is still perfectly usable without the enclosure and is purely an optional extra. But I still recommend getting the enclosure anyway, because without the enclosure, the underside of the PCB is exposed and it's just better to get extra protection for something you're going to spend about $100 on in the first place. And the lights just look better with the enclosure in general. You can also buy a DIY kit version. It's cheaper than the assembled version at $70 without the enclosure and $85 with the enclosure. So go for the kit if you want to save money and if you're alright with assembling this yourself and have the tools to do so. The Pico Voltex actually isn't the first mini Sound Voltex controller that Speedy Potato has made. His first version was actually a small batch of controllers that he sold on the K-Shoot Main subreddit. I remember seeing this years ago and thinking to myself, wow, that's cute. A friend of mine actually bought this back then and I had a chance to try it at the time. And I also remember thinking to myself, man, those FX buttons are a little too close to the BT buttons. And yeah, they were. This was of course changed in the later versions of the controller, as you can see here. Speedy Potato's controllers were actually based on Mon's Pocket Voltex controller. He actually started this project because he wanted a Pocket Voltex controller but couldn't buy it. Mon's Pocket Voltex controller is probably the first minicon for Sound Voltex that was sold, and it's also open sourced. Mon's pretty busy, so he only sold the Pocket Voltexes in batches, and his batch sales were really far and in between. I remember Mon sold a batch of them back in late 2017, and I passed on the sale at the time because I didn't have money. And then the next time he actually did sell them was a year later in late 2018, which at the time I did manage to get. I'll compare these controllers, even though most people will never get their hands on the Pocket Voltex. But yeah, let's first go over the Pico Voltex's construction. The construction is alright. The 3D printed enclosure gives it a little homemade feeling, but to be honest, that's what this is. The top plate that holds all the switches is an FR4 plate with RGB shine through. I didn't know you could silkscreen a transparent FR4 plate until I saw this. The design of the top is also really nice. When I first saw the controller in action on Speedy's YouTube channel, I knew this was the best looking mini Sound Voltex controller right now. It looks better than the Pocket Voltex. In terms of size, this is about the same size as the Pocket Voltex, or about from the left shift to the comma key on the keyboard. Though even though the sizes are really similar, the BT buttons are actually a lot more spaced out than the Pocket Voltex. And this is where the controller really shines for me. The more spaced out switches let the controller use 1.5U XDA keycaps compared to the smaller G20 keycaps that the Pocket Voltex uses. The bigger buttons and more space to move around makes it way easier to hit patterns. You can do trills and chords much better on this controller compared to the Pocket Voltex, and it's very playable. I honestly cannot put it into words how well this key spacing on the controller works. Playable is an understatement. It works super well. Though another thing to note that the FX buttons on the Pico Voltex are a bit smaller than the Pocket Voltex. The Pico uses 2U keycaps, while the Pocket Voltex uses 2.25U. I would prefer the Pico to be a bit longer like the Pocket so that trills are easier to do with thumbs. But still, this is playable, though I wish it was longer. But to be honest, for me right now, I'll just replace the 2U keycaps with 2.25U keycaps later. They are compatible, you can just switch them. As for the knobs, I believe these use Born encoders. They're high quality stuff unlike typical cheap encoders you can get elsewhere. They're smooth and they turn nicely. And as for the aluminum knobs themselves, they're textured at the sides just like arcade knobs, which is so nice. It's so cute. I really like that. Though to be honest, for using these knobs, well, in play they do actually wiggle a little. But to be honest, it really doesn't affect play that much at all, and well, arcade knobs actually kinda wiggle like this too, so... Sometimes while playing, I felt like the knobs were a little too close to the buttons. And well, aside from pure distance on the controller itself, this feeling of being too close to the knobs could actually be from the fact that the knobs are at a different angle from the buttons compared to the Pocket Voltex and an arcade accurate controller. It felt claustrophobic, and I didn't really like the smaller size of the knobs and preferred the way the Pocket Voltex's knobs were a bit bigger. But just replacing the knobs with something bigger is not something that I would do because it would just make the feeling of less distance even worse. But well, aside from all the gripes that I just pointed out, it's not something that's actually game-breaking in the slightest, and it's something to just get used to. It's just a really interesting or weird feeling to be able to hit knobs so quickly. But now, let's talk about the rubber feet at the bottom. These are so cute. They're tiny versions of the feet you can find on bigger arcade controllers. They actually work really well for what they are, honestly. I mean, the controller still slides around quite a bit when you use the knobs, but it's a lot less bad than the Pocket Voltex. The Pocket Voltex uses these rubber feet and, well, that controller seriously slides around like crazy. So honestly, these rubber feet is an improvement. And an improvement is an improvement, and I don't think there's any way for Speedy to make it stop sliding around other than strapping an extra 1 kg metal plate to the back of the controller. Weight is mostly the issue here, because this controller is too light to ground properly. But since sliding is still an issue, I recommend putting an extra rubber mat underneath the controller, but even then, it doesn't stop all the sliding either, so I guess the best solution that you could do is to straight up tape the controller to your table if you can, but yeah, it's not really ideal. Other things to know is that the controller is actually quite loud due to the way it's constructed. The insides are a little hollow, unlike the Pocket Voltex's acrylic stack. And yeah, so here's a sound test to demonstrate. Though it's still nowhere as loud as an actual controller, so I guess this is still good in my books. Just note about the sound. On default, when you plug the controller in, it boots into gamepad mode. This controller and this mode is compatible with EA Cloud and other simulators like unnamed Sound Voltex clone and K-Shootmania. No other setup is required. And it also has another keyboard mouse mode if you hold down BTA while plugging in the controller. And as for the LEDs, you can turn them off by holding down start while plugging it in. Though, please note that right now, modes aren't saved between cycles, so you have to repeat this hold down button progress each time you connect the controller. It resets to default each time you unplug it and replug it, and that includes turning off the LEDs. Well, if you forget any of these, you can just find these in the Quick Start Guide document located on the website support page. It also includes stuff like how to flash firmware updates. So yeah, just remember that in case you ever forget. Overall, this controller is very much a tinier version of what you get from a Sound Voltex controller. From the textured knobs to the rubber feet, this is really it. It is very playable, and it was really fun using it. You can play up to high-level charts with this, and that's really what surprised me. I was floored. I honestly consider the Pico Voltex an affordable gateway drug to Sound Voltex. It's much cheaper than an actual controller, and because it's small and light, shipping will be cheaper as well. But yeah, trust me, once you get your hands on this thing, you will have a blast with Sound Voltex, and you will want to get an arcade controller someday. And if you already do own a Sound Voltex controller, this is still a fun, cute, small gimmick to own, and it's great for a quick session if you're too lazy to pull out your entire controller. Non-arcade accuracy aside, I still got a number of personal bests with the Pico Voltex on USC, and that's even with the sliding. This thing is on some crazy shit. So yeah, this is like really nice to use. This is nice. I have no idea how to describe it, it's just nice. 8 out of 10. Minus 2 points for the sliding and shorter FX buttons. Also, if you do get the DIY kit version, I'll be posting a video form of the assembly guide. So if you need a guide, look out for that video. Anyway, now for some gameplay. And thanks for watching.